Hey everyone, Gaijin Goombah here. So, hey, can I go off on something that's kind of boiled my blood for the last 5 years? I mean, I know that this is something that only I and my overanalyzing dumb brain really cares about, but hey, my patrons want to hear me go off over this, so... Okay. So there's a lot of games, anime, shows, and what have you that focus on the three great unifiers of Japan. Nothing inherently wrong with that. I mean, history makes for good fiction. And if anything, the Sengoku period of Japan is probably the most adapted period of the country's existence when it comes to games and shows, but I just... Look at this!
Nobunaga! You're too late, Jubei. I've just transferred my power into this golden evil statue.
I know it's different between the various games and anime that featured them, but in the whole, Oda Nobunaga looks like this, while Hideyoshi looks like this, and Tokugawa looks like this. And this kind of consistency is in nearly every game and anime that features these three. I mean, at best, Oda Nobunaga is an emotionless demon of a man, and at worst, he's just a straight-up demon. While Hideyoshi is always the funny monkey man, and Tokugawa is the literal goddamn golden boy who's destined to usher in peace to Japan and start a revolutionary new era of growth and power.
May my fists unite all!
This is so stupid! Look, my job for the last decade has been looking into popular media and talking about the culture that inspires it, right? Well, occasionally I'll come across popular media that takes a cartoonishly incorrect inspiration with its historical figures, and I just... Stop! Like, you might be asking me why this bothers me so much. After all, I love Warhammer now, and that franchise is as over the top in comedy, brutality, and inhuman stupidity as it gets. Well, I mentioned before, and I'll say it again. I hate Naruto-ification, defined as the concept of a historical figure whose popular perception has become so integrated in everyday media that people will believe the fantasy to be the truth, with Naruto being one of the worst examples of this perversion of history due to its own popularity. Now that may sound like me trying to ruin everyone's fun, but I've had far too many occasions of people asking me if such and such Japanese historical figure did such and such impossible feat with no hint of sarcasm in their voice, and I grow just a little bit more worried about the history and culture that I care so deeply about being overshadowed by waifus and gender bending. But this particular misunderstanding of Nobunaga, Ieyasu, and Toyotomi is probably one of, if not the oldest examples of Naruto-ification. And it's something that I hinted at in a previous video, but never really spread my wings about with this issue. But hey, like I said, patrons really want to hear why this subject puts a particularly nasty wedgie in my fundoshi. So let's break this sucker down, cause good god does pop media do Nobunaga dirty. Like, even in the games and shows that try to do him realistic justice, they just flanderize him into another man that's emotionless, insane, and just a devil. Now, a lot of this I've already gone into detail with my video on Oda Nobunaga and how he inspired my stupid Warhammer 40k orc war boss, Orca Nobudaka. So if you want some really fine details and a bunch of citations, just go watch that. I've got way too much to talk about with these two in order to reiterate everything. But for the uninitiated, let's go over some things that history recalls that gave Nobunaga the legacy of being an actual monster. First up, the supplanting of Ashikaga Yoshiaki. Very long story short, while Nobunaga was consolidating power and taking over territory with Ieyasu Tokugawa, then Matsudaira watching his eastern flank, he was approached by the claimed descendant of the long-lost shogunate family that fell out of power during the Oni War, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, asking Nobunaga if he would help him restore the old Ashikaga shogunate line. This, of course, was the perfect pretext for Nobunaga to storm Kyoto unopposed, which he did, and in turn made Yoshiaki into a puppet shogun. Eventually, all of this leading to Yoshiaki's exile from the capital and Nobunaga basically gaining the powers of the shogunate. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that this was a dirty, underhanded thing to do. After all, if Yoshiaki was the true heir, wouldn't putting him into power be the moral thing to do? Honestly, I don't think so. Ashikaga Yoshiaki may have had the lineage, but as a member of a deposed ruler who needed another daimyo to help him get into power, I don't think Yoshiaki had the power or leadership to successfully bring any kind of peace to Japan. Nobunaga, on the other hand, was already rallying or subjugating a good number of clans as well as making good momentum. I argue that if we look at this logistically, Yoshiaki would not have brought stability to Japan either through good leadership or military might, as he was so lacking in both that he needed the help of Oda Nobunaga. Like, I'm being real with y'all, I don't honestly know what this kid expected to happen aside from what literally happened. Now, the second naughty thing that Nobunaga did that history berates him for is the burning of multiple Buddhist temples like Ishiyama Honganji and Innakuchi. A lot of folks, especially back then, took this act as a direct threat to Buddhism as a whole and believed Nobunaga to hate the peaceful, centralized religion. I find that to be absolutely hilarious. Why? Because the temples of Ishiyama Honganji and Innakuchi were not religious grounds of peaceful practice. They were fortresses of the Iko-Iki, a highly militant separatist group. Under their leader Denyo Shonin, who taught the importance of equality in one of the most unequal countries at this period of time, the Iko-Iki overthrew their local Shugo governor Tanayasu Yasutaka in 1488 and claimed the province of Kaga for themselves. Now for the Sengoku Jidai, this seems kinda normal, right? Like, all the daimyo were fighting all over territory, so what makes the Iko-Iki special? Well, the problem is that the Iko-Iki weren't a clan. They didn't follow centralized established law, and they weren't going to follow central established law. Despite the Civil War, the structure of the shogunate wasn't going anywhere, and the Iko-Iki hated the other daimyo and samurai for putting innocent people in a 200-year-long war. Now look, I'm gonna be completely fair. I get that frustration, I really do. Death was so common this period of time that it was inevitable that a large group of victimized people would be so put off by the fighting that they would rise up. But these were separatists. They essentially wanted to secede from Japan and become a micronation of their own. So even if they were left completely alone during the Warring States period, they were not willing to reunify under whatever centralized power took Kyoto. And when you consider that Mount Hiei, the location of Innakuchi, was right next to Kyoto and the central government, how likely do you think it would be that these separatists would have attacked Kyoto trying to depose samurai rule? Here's the other problem. The Iko-Iki's military power was not made up of just established warriors. You had Sohei monks and displaced samurai, sure, but a large part of the military force was a peasant militia. So during the standard siege of Ishiyama Honganji by Nobunaga, which was both unsuccessful and took 10 years' time to do, you'd think that Nobunaga's forces would find themselves spear to spear with samurai, Sohei, and peasants alike, right? So, with a fanatical separatist group that refused a new centralized government, wouldn't pay taxes, could pose a huge threat to the new centralized government once it was formed, and a militia made up of all castes of people and couldn't be conventionally stopped by regular sieges, what do you think was going to happen? Like, let me try to make this relatable. Let's say Texas finally seceded from the United States and then had open hostility to the federal government in Washington, D.C. What do you think is going to happen? And the funny thing too is that this exact same thing could be said for the other separatist would-be micronation of Iga. It was a land not ruled by traditional samurai law, but one of the Iga Sokoku-Iki, a confederation of 12 families that ruled themselves independently. Everything that made the Iko-Iki a threat having to be dealt with unconventionally applies to the Iga as well. A pocket country that would not recognize centralized leadership, comprised of a militia of samurai and peasants alike, that actively fought against the shogunate rule, and did not fight conventionally either. What do you think was going to happen? Finally, we've got the big one that seems to haunt Nobunaga in all his fictitious iterations. His nickname of Dairokuten Mao Nobunaga, Demon King of the Sixth Heaven Nobunaga. Folks, this is not the man actually saying he was a literal demon. This was a clapback to Takeda Shingen, who claimed to be Tendai no Zasu Shamon Shingen, a militant Buddhist deity protecting the religion. After reading this missive of Shingen's declaration, Nobunaga essentially said, "Nah, screw you," and called himself the devil of Buddhism. And when you consider that he's been going through 10 years of fighting the Iko-Iki and being utterly done with this nonsense, this snide retort makes a lot of sense. Now, if anyone's got anything else they want to add to this list, feel free to drop it in the comments, but I rest my case with Nobunaga. Yeah, he was kind of a dick, sure, but the atrocities that history remembers him for, at the very least, make sense as to why he did them. I get it, wrong thing for the right reason is still a sin, but that brings us to our other two unifiers, whose travesties history and pop media like to conveniently forget when the new Sengoku Basara or Samurai Warrior games releases. Let's start with the literal worst of the three. Oh, Hideyoshi, your story of becoming a leader of Japan would be kind of inspirational if you weren't such an insufferable multinational mass murderer. Did that get your attention? Cool, let's get to the horrific stuff. The Imjin War. While in power, Toyotomi Hideyoshi thought it'd be a great idea to invade Korea and eventually take over China. Now, why did he do this? History isn't 100% sure. Some say he did it because he thought it would have been an easy win to expand Japan's control of East Asia. Some say it was him trying to give the samurai, who had no more wars to fight, something to do instead of more infighting. And others say that, in the past, Nobunaga would joke about taking over China and Hideyoshi took that personally. For whatever reason, by the end of the invasion, 150,000 to 450,000 Korean people were dead. Warriors, peasants, men, women, children. The samurai did not discriminate. However, the samurai were eventually driven back nearly single-handedly by the unmitigated Korean badass, Admiral Yi Sun-sen. No one seems to talk about this all that often. No one seems to talk about how Hideyoshi was directly responsible for the invasion of and mass slaughtering of hundreds of thousands of people in a country that he had no jurisdiction over. Nobunaga had a lot of blood on his hands, but joking about it or not, he never made clear intentions on invading and deposing another nation. Heck, it's not even like Hideyoshi needed the extra territory. Unlike World War II, where Japan was eyeing up their neighbors for invasion for the sake of obtaining more natural resources for their over-exploding economy, I can't for the life of me understand why Hideyoshi did this aside from the fact that he was trying to flex. Japan wasn't in a state of really needing anything more than what it had. Hell, in the story of Ishikawa Goemon versus Toyotomi Hideyoshi, told in different kinds of plays, stories, and what have you, Goemon himself calls out Hideyoshi for being a land-grabbing, thieving asshole. Now, this alone could make Hideyoshi one of the most immoral unifier of Japan, but we're just getting started with this guy. Let's talk about how he came to power, shall we? If you thought Nobunaga having Yoshiaki acting as his puppet shogun was questionable, Hideyoshi, who was Kanpaku or imperial regent at the time of Nobunaga's death, eventually married Yodo Dono, who was distantly related to the Minamoto clan, the clan who established the shogunate back in 1185. Thus, when his son Hideyori was born, he could finally claim blood lineage to the shogunate. Kind of. Whatever, chief. Of course, this is after he murdered his other heir in cold blood. Yeah, see, originally, since Hideyoshi was struggling to have a son, he adopted his nephew, Toyotomi Hidetsugu, to be his heir in 1591. But as soon as Hideyoshi had his biological son, he ordered Hidetsugu to commit seppuku on Mount Koya and had the entirety of Hidetsugu's family and retainers murdered to make way for his biological son. Hideyoshi went, haha, whoops, I have an actual kid now, and killed his family over his own mistake. But never mind that, look how funny he is, he's a monkey man! Oh, and speaking of murder, let's talk about the 37,000 Japanese Christians he brutally slaughtered. Yeah, see, while Nobunaga was in power, he actually pushed for Christianity in Japan. Not for religious reasons, mind you, he was just so pissed off at how much uncontested power Buddhism developed that he wanted to make sure that there was a stronger separation of church and state, if you will. And yeah, after 10 years of fighting the Iko-Iki, I can buy that. Hideyoshi, however, had other plans. His logic was, if you serve God with all your heart, mind, and soul, then how can you serve your lords? Easily, my dude, Emperor Constantine made it work with the Roman Empire. Either way, in 1579, Hideyoshi crucified 26 Catholic Japanese, 6 foreigners, and a 12-year-old child. But that was just the beginning. Up until 1642, Christianity was brutally outlawed. Which, yeah, that means Tokugawa was getting in on this, and just you wait, you gold-plated bastard. I'm gonna tear you apart. Tales tell of Japanese Christians being branded with hot irons, boiled alive, bound with stones, and hung upside down in pits while they slowly bled to death over days at a time. With the most famous activity during all of this time was the trampling of the fumie. The population was required to trample on tablets of Mary and Jesus, and those that refused were prosecuted and executed. Thanks, funny monkey man, you sure earned that jovial demeanor, didn't you? But hey, if you thought Hideyoshi only oppressed the Christians, nah man, he oppressed everyone. This was the guy who was responsible for Japan's long-running caste system. See, prior to Hideyoshi, it was entirely possible for a peasant to become a samurai through their actions. Hell, this is how Hideyoshi went from being Nobunaga's sandal bearer to the leader of the freaking country. But Hideyoshi made the ultimate dick move of pulling up the ladder behind him on a national level. Not only were people bound to the caste they were born into, but traveling within the country was no longer legal without a permit, families were tied to the land that they inherited and could not move, and no one outside of the samurai were allowed to possess weapons. Did this keep the country from falling back into civil war? Sure it did. Did it disempower the everyday person to a point of helplessness? You better believe it. Not only could people never become more than what they were born into, but they were utterly locked to where they lived. But if you think that was the worst a unifier could do in order to cripple their own country's ability to grow and thrive, let's drag Ieyasu Tokugawa to the firing line. Yeah, that golden boy shogun that pop media loves to portray as the most optimistic, positive thinking, or at the very least altruistic personality of the three? Ooh, let's take a crack at him. Towards the end of his life, with the drama of the Imjin War and his successor crisis behind him, Hideyoshi, on his deathbed, brought 5 of the men he knew as equal parts loyal and trustworthy to his rule, and had them take a special oath of allegiance called a Kishomon. On the 5th day of the 8th month in 1598, Uesugi Kagekatsu, Mori Terumoto, Ukita Hideye, Maeda Toshie, and Ieyasu Tokugawa swore an 8-article oath in which the 5 men were to watch over Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori, until he was of age to properly rule in the same single-minded loyalty that they showed him. They also swore to restrain their own personal interests, squabblings, and jealousies, thus becoming what we now know today as the Gotairo. But one problem. This council fell apart almost as soon as it was formed. Some of the members, like Maeda Toshie, died shortly after the signing, while others were less than thrilled to be subservient to a child. But in my opinion, Ieyasu Tokugawa was the worst traitor to the Gotairo of them all. Why? Because he used the flimsiest of pretexts to directly attack Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori. It all started with a bell. Ieyasu had insisted that the shogunate under Hideyori threatened him via an inscription on a bell from Hokoji, a temple that Hideyori had been constructing. On it was written Koka Anko, meaning security and peace in the nation. But Ieyasu interpreted this as the 2 kanji of his name being separated by another kanji that means, well, separation. So, apparently this was enough to start a war. Yeah, buddy. Great excuse to betray your oath, huh? Now, some historians say that Tokugawa tried to make things work with Hideyori after all of this by giving him Osaka Castle to chill in, and even married his granddaughter, Senhime, to Hideyori as a way to create better ties. But these were not altruistic actions. These were to cover Ieyasu's tracks up until 1614, when Ieyasu sieged Osaka Castle and Hideyori, forcing Hideyori's death, his family's death, and the burning of Osaka Castle to the ground. Now, I also know these historians are going to sit there and tell me that Hideyori did try to bite back against Ieyasu, but come on. Ieyasu broke his Kishamon oath to Hideyoshi, and he did it explicitly for power, not out of necessity. So, what did Ieyasu do with all that power? Well, first of all, he kept the other daimyo perpetually bankrupt. No joke. Once he established his new capital in Edo, in 1635 he made it a law that not only did every daimyo and important figurehead have a place of residence there, not cheap I'll add, but they all had to return to the capital and actually reside there for several months out of the year. Like, just imagine that you're a daimyo all the way out in freaking Kyushu. It's gonna take a lot of money and time to travel all the way to Edo and then back. By doing this, Ieyasu not only kept any potential rivals in a constant state of spending, but by dragging them to Edo from their home for months at a time, it kept these daimyo away from their lands and decentralized any power that they could potentially build up. I mean, God, side tangent for a minute. Did you know that Ieyasu was so money-oriented that he created edicts and propaganda to the people that stated anyone who had a lot of money likely got it from doing something wrong, and poverty is pious? Yeah, it's a sentiment that still lives with some of the older generations of people in Japan today. If you have a lot of money, you are immediately sus. And Tokugawa was the one who made it that way. But hey, what could be worse than keeping your country broke? Probably sealing it off for the rest of the world for 200 years. Yeah, let's talk about Sakoku. In a similar vein to Hideyoshi, Tokugawa, unlike Nobunaga, was paranoid about the outside influences of other nations creating destabilization within the newly reformed centralized government. So, Ieyasu closed the entire country from the rest of the freaking world for 2 centuries. This means ignoring not only major world events that this government could learn from, but it also meant that any technological development, military or otherwise, was kept away from Japan. Like, seriously, think about that. 200 years of global and scientific development that Japan had zero access to. No wonder it was so easy for Matthew Perry to completely roll over the shogunate when the black ships showed up. Thus, this decision made 2 centuries ago brought about another cataclysmic civil war within Japan via the Boshin War. And from it came the Meiji Restoration and the realization that, oh crap, we gotta modernize fast or we're gonna end up like China after the Opium Wars. Good job, Ieyasu. Good job. Alright, all cynicism aside, does that mean that I think Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, is an angel compared to Tokugawa and Hideyoshi? Absolutely not. The man did some pretty horrendous crap in his time to gain power. But this depiction of him alongside these depictions of Tokugawa and Hideyoshi? No, man, just no. I know these depictions are fictional and it's creative minds just having some fun, but like I said before, I've actually met plenty of people who thought this is how these three really were, and that's dangerous. At least speaking as a historian, I think so. So all in all, I don't mean this to be an attack on anyone's favorite depiction of the three great unifiers, as much as I hate Lolly Nobunaga. I mean, you do you, gang. But I feel like we occasionally need to pull open our textbooks from time to time and remember that these three guys were not good people. They all did terrible things for the sake of power, and only in a few rare occasions do I find that anime and gaming is honest about this. Basara, for example, portraying Hideyoshi as a power-hungry ape? That checks out. And Basilisk portraying Ieyasu as... Jesus. Look, all I'm saying is it's important to remember how things actually were. Have fun with fiction, but don't forget the facts. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you to my patrons for voting on this topic. I almost felt like I left this topic unfinished after the Orca Nobunaga video, so it was great to actually have some complete closure here. Also, here's hoping for a Witch Ninja on Deathmaster Snitch for all you Warhammer fans out there. So if you love learning about Japan through your favorite games and anime, sub up, get notified, and until next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goombah, signing out.